My beloved ones, in the tremendously epic clearing, evolution, and the discarding of old paradigms altogether that is happening with us during these last few months has culminated in very focused efforts to do certain things, to evolve atomic matter, to shed old memories, etc. Well, there's one thing that hasn't actually responded quite the way that I had hoped it would, and there's a reason for it, and we will deal with this reason in the rest of September and possibly into October. But here is the thing. What holds this painful, conflicted reality in place? It's a simulation. And we have understood, and this was made very clear in the August premiere webinar, that it is due entirely to the atom's subatomic particle called the electron that yields and creates a magnetic field. Every atom has an electron or electrons that create an electromagnetic field. It starts out magnetic. As you look up through the dimensions, you see that it also creates an electric field. It also creates an electromagnetic field, which is a very powerful field that holds memories in place of the matrices telling us how life should be, which we know has been extremely strained and stressful and has deteriorated in terms of grace. So, atoms respond to intent. We mentioned in the August webinar that there was a slit experiment done in which these little atoms were fired through slits. And when the experimental scientists did that, they acted like little cannonballs. When nobody watched them, they were completely different because they were responding to how he expected them to be. But when there was no person watching and it was bombarded, they would move like little waves. And in fact, they'd move like little waves through both slits. Now, they accurately deduced, and I don't know how they came up with this, but they're absolutely correct, that it's both at once. They're little waveforms and they're little cannonballs. They're both at once. It depends on the intent of the person watching it, yes, but it actually depends on the reality they create. In one reality, they're one way, in another reality, another. The bottom line of it is that that which holds life in place, which we are trying to move into more graceful simulation, because the simulation has deteriorated. There is much savagery on Earth. So, to do that, we have to cleanse these fields. We have to remove from them that which they hold. And in fact, in September's premiere webinar, we will learn a lot more about that. I just haven't received it yet. But beloved ones, why isn't that happening? Because our intent should cleanse atomic fields because they respond to intent. Well, one of the reasons is that nothing changes to the new, nothing upgrades itself, nothing transcends its present circumstances without our acknowledging the value of the present circumstances. So, we are trying to make painful things like, let's say, the Holocaust great trauma in our own lives, etc., go away because it's held in those atomic fields, but we haven't seen it from another perspective. You will find that perspective is very much emphasized during the astounding information we are receiving during each of these weeks we're working together. Because dimensions don't exist. Different states of expression don't exist, like life, death, ascension. What they are is different perspectives looking at the same thing. So perspective is extremely important. So, beloved ones, as we look at the past traumatic events as things that we just don't want to have anymore, we don't want that, it's opposing them. Opposing something strengthens it. But perspective creates dimension. We are in a situation where our perspective of the past memories of trauma specifically held in the atomic fields is dragging us down into lower expression, lower reality, because we view it as lower, and it will be what we view it as. So we need to actually revisit the past and revisit it in a way that we see it from a different perspective. That's the first step. The value of those things, well, we will get there, but for right now, this Explorers of Consciousness episode, shall we call it, is designed to look at the past differently. How can we look at the past? For instance, let's think of a big, epic, but tragic movie like the Titanic. How many times did people go and see this over and over? It was nicer the second and third time because they knew the outcome, so they could relax and just enjoy the drama. Well, that's your past. You know the outcome. And you know that that past has brought you to these glorious moments in which you have undertaken to do tasks no one else in the entire individuated cosmoses do. You are the absolute leadership of existence. Whatever has gone before has brought you to this point. Enjoy the movie as an adventurous drama rather than a tragedy. You know the outcome. A movie where you know the outcome, where there's great tragedy and drama in it, like the Titanic, is so much more fun the second time, because you know it's going to be okay. Rose is going to be saved off the ship and live a happy life. My beloved ones, let us begin by looking at something during this Explorers of Consciousness that we see like a grand, epic movie. We were actors in the movie. You were actors in the movie as the original ones. And you look at your role coming and going from a different light. You see, each time the original ones came back to the Earth from their other home planet, not so much a home, but a second home, Altea, they found the Earth in shambles. They found such tragedy, such destruction, such decay of the beautiful beings, the human beings that they had intended. They also simulated their reality, and that also was deteriorating. Now, it was tragedy and disappointment that the humans couldn't live up to the potential that was given to them that has been in the back of our looking at humans as a great disappointment. The disappointment was massive, and it was often. Every time the original ones came back, hoping that mankind had flourished, into high cultures, they found them deteriorated into savagery. So this disappointment in humans not reaching their potential has to be changed. We are going to look at the original ones through a very specific lens. I will explain in a moment, but with the purpose of seeing the grand adventure and seeing it as a great movie. You know the outcome. You know that you are always the heroes that are there to save them from their own destruction. You know the outcome. You'll take them where they need to go. You have been governing the earth as the sacred government. You've prevented a lot of tragedies. So now sit back and enjoy the drama. There are 3 interactions that we will be tracking, and we will be tracking them as they cross each other's timelines on a specific point. For instance, if there is a set of ruins that has layers of building to it, you can see, oh, this was the first layer built by so-and-so, here's the second layer, this is when the next wave of people came to this spot. Here's a third layer, here's where the third layer interacts. It is such a massive drama, the drama of the original ones and the earth, that for today we will just examine a little piece and begin to see the adventure, not the tragedy, of this movie. There are multiple movies, but let's look at one. And the crossover point is a specific set of ruins, and I've asked that you be given pictures of them, of the Kailash ruins in India. This is the area where the original ones came back to, because it has a time tunnel, and they traveled, as you know, the original ones have often been called in the records, we translated the tunnel makers. They came through space and they came also through time. So twice they came back to that specific location because the first time they created a time tunnel to there. So they used it a second time. So the original structure, which is deep underground, of the Kailash ruins was actually created by the original ones. What for, etc., we will tell you in today's episode, Drama of the Past. Beloved ones, next came a group of missionaries that went all over the known world 2 by 2. They are known as the Nagas, or the Nakal in Egypt, or the Naguals in Central and South America. They were Lemurian missionaries. Lemuria knew from their prophecies that they would cease to exist at least one time, if not more than one time, with massive cataclysms, but the final one would wipe them out. So what they valued most and wanted to pass on most to the world was their cosmology, that which they have gathered, because the goal of the Nagas was for man to rise to his highest potential. They came to the Kailash area because they were told that this is the point, the origin of creation of man on earth. And they're right, because the original ones were there first. So they came there, and this became a temple to them. You'll see the purpose of the temple in my discussion. And then, at some point, they were massacred. And Isis and the Ra gods, and very specifically Isis, she was a being of great darkness, took it over and declared herself a goddess after it worked so well to subdue the masses that Thoth later did the same thing for himself and became Quetzalcoatl in Central America. But regardless, she declared herself a goddess and took this site, which the population already knew as a holy site, and made it her temple. There's a lake nearby where this feminine deity, it was a lake where women would go to be purified, not men. This was her very accentuated female deity worship place. And we will speak about all that. And looking back, look at it as a movie that you sit back and watch. We often watch movies with great tragedy, with great heroism, and an epic sweep of things happening over multiple generations. This is your movie. Look at the great adventure of your interstellar life as an original one, with excitement that you can participate and indeed initiate such drama. My last statement before we listen to our story of the past is this. If you look back, and we will practice this, so, just know this principle. When we look back at our life as a fascinating movie, as a drama, as a story of overcoming, as a story of endurance or heroism or moral courage, whatever we look at it as, if we appreciate the adventure and we see it against the backdrop of eternity, eternal perspective, adventurous perspective, it changes that which is being held of its memory in the fields between the atoms. And it makes it something that once we've seen a movie, we can discard it. We've watched it, we've seen the drama, we've had it. What is the purpose of a good movie? It's to give vitality to you. Yes, I did that. This is grand. Or, hey, this is the story of man's courage. We get inspiration from it. So in seeing it with different lenses of perspective, we gain its inspiration, and then the electron's field can release it as something that dictates life now. It's a movie, change the channel. Beloved ones, just sit back and see the drama you participated in. The original ones by space races that have talked to me over the many years about them. They view them as something to be very weary of because they are more powerful than any other race encountered in our cosmos, and that includes parallel cosmoses where some races have infiltrated into the current cosmos. Now, the original ones have another planet. It is called Altea. By them, it is very, very far reaches of space, and I'm sure our telescopes have picked it up, but that they haven't given it a name. My understanding is that this is sort of a sanctuary for them, that they come, they repopulate the earth, they do genetic altering, and they stay, for many years, who knows, maybe close to 1 million years, but then they leave again. And they come back as needed after cataclysms wipe out civilizations. So they have come back 4 times. The first 2 times of coming back, they established themselves at the Kailash site. The second time they come back, now, here's where it gets tricky, is to pinpoint dates, because not only do we have a few hundred years missing in the Middle Ages, etc., But we are completely unaware of the fact because we can only see time moving forward. So we are completely unaware of the fact that time also moves backwards as many times as it moves forwards. And that there are at times wrinkles in time so that we skip over maybe 100,000 years in the wrinkle because we just went straight across. Sometimes we come back to complete something in the wrinkle, sometimes we don't. So time is such a tricky thing to even begin to accurately describe. But let's go back to the original ones. The original ones went twice to the Kailash monument. Well, it wasn't a monument, but the third time they came, they went to the Micronesian island of Pohnpei, Pohnpei. And they were on the east coast at a place currently called Nan Madol. I looked this up on the map to be able to give you some names. Pohnpei Island, Nan Madol on the east coast is where they came to the third time. And then the fourth time, and there's a nebulousness around this. I don't know what it is, if it was destroyed, if they removed it, or what it was, but it seems to me that they came to one of the oldest lands that has survived many different floodings and breaking up, and most of Africa was underwater at some point other than Ethiopia and the tip of Africa. They came the fourth time to the tip of Africa, not the very, very tip, but they were near the Victoria Falls. And I'm aware that there are the ruins of the Zimbabwe ruins there, but that's not their structure at all. Okay, so that's where they came to 4 times. They are here a 5th time, but they are scattered amongst humanity all around the world because this is what their mission requires. They look like man. Normally they would be much taller, but they look like man. They are fitting right into man. Many of them believe they are man, like yourself. So the original ones have infiltrated amongst man, and they are just starting to awaken to who they are. So let's go back to the 2 times they were at the Kailash. Now, I have not said that they repaired or rebuilt the Kailash with the second time they came back, and there was a very large gap between of millions of years. So the first time they came, they built it, and I see not real ornateness, but real elegance. Beautiful architecture, large spaces, high ceilings, but I don't see the ornateness, for instance, that you find at the time of Isis. And the Nagas were not interested in the ornateness. They were interested in sacred geometry, that which would facilitate perception and awareness. And they were very interested in carving their teachings onto the walls so that it would stay that way. The Kailash of the time of the original ones, and as we said, it's like 300 million years ago when the land masses still were at one. The first building, spacious rooms. When they came back a second time, all they did was they did some adding on. They needed different space, so they made more rooms. Well, how could it still be standing? And why have I not said that they had to rebuild it? The original ones were very powerful, and they had many skills at their command. The reality that they helped to create, because they are the originators of man, was a simulated reality that was supposed to renew itself 16 times. We are now at its 5th time, and it's not renewing, it's deteriorating. And I have explained in detail why it's deteriorating, why reality on Earth is deteriorating when the original ones created the ability for the simulation of the reality that they created and helped create to renew itself 16 times. Why is it now deteriorating? It's well worth it. If you can get the August webinar, it will explain why something was designed to renew itself 16 times, like this simulation program we call reality, and why after 5 times it is deteriorating, and what the consequences of that would be. So, how this ties in with the Kailash. Their facility at Kailash was designed to be self-renewing 16 times. It only renewed itself twice, because they were only there twice, and then they withdrew the ability of it to keep renewing. It's very far under the ground. Can the satellites see that far? It can, but it's a very, very well-kept secret, because the American satellites can see over a mile into the Earth. But, this is helpful for enemy things under the land, etc. So it's not something they're about to bandy about, shall we say. So the Kailash, if it renewed itself millions of years later, and somebody were to ever dig that deep to dig it up, you can see it would show the wrong date, because it renewed itself from a previous creation. So why India, and why that location? First of all, that area where the 4 animals are in the concentric circles, they actually depict the 4 ages of man, and the 5th age is represented by the structure in the middle. The ages of man, 4 ages of man. This is represented by their 4 times of coming back before. I've said this 5th time they're integrated into humanity, coming back before and renewing the genetics of man. Why was it necessary to renew the genetics? Well, for instance, the Nagual oral traditions go back close to 1 million years, between 800,000, after that it gets a little fuzzy, to about 1 million years back. They say that the largest catastrophe to ever hit this planet was the sinking of Lemuria, and that it killed 64 million civilians when it sank. The second largest was when the Atlantic Ocean's massive crater, it's almost the whole ocean big. You can see it from satellite images, this massive crater, and there is evidence that it has at some point erupted. When it erupted, it shattered the land masses and broke them up even more. I assume that they had started to drift away from each other before that, but I don't know that. But it thrust India northwards into the continent. And according to the Nagual traditions, the second largest catastrophe to hit the Earth was when the Himalayas arose in a single day. It thrust the continent northwards. Apparently, where the Himalayas are now, there was a river, a very wide river, no doubt the result of two tectonic plates meeting. But next to this river, there were millions and millions of inhabitants. And there were only some Tartars that were already high up in mountains, I don't know where, that survived this. When it shoved India into the continent, the mountains covered millions and millions of inhabitants along the valley of that river. Why India? There's multiple reasons. I don't know why, but their time-traveling opening of its tunnel, the original ones are called in some of the old records that I have translated, they are called the tunnel makers. They make tunnels between times and spaces. The tunnel of time opening was right there where the 4 concentric circles marked the 4 cycles of man. Now, I believe it might be in our Irash Sattva Yoga material, where it describes 24 animals that map out the ages of earthly existence. They are definitely divided into 4 groups, and the 4 groups fall in those 4 ages of man. What you're seeing with those animals and the cycles, it's a historical depiction of how man has come and gone and come and gone. The oral traditions of the Naguals, they say that after the mountains rose and killed all those people, there was a massive descent of humanity into savagery. They became very animalistic. And at that point, and why then, every time there is such a big catastrophe, there's a huge shock that goes through humanity, and shock drains energy and resources that are needed to maintain a specific level of consciousness. There was so little consciousness left because the shock of this event, we don't know what other humans were killed or their numbers. This is only speaking about one region. When that massive crater in the Atlantic erupted, flooded most of Africa, they were definitely needed to come back. When they came back, they chose to come back to the Pohnpei, Nan-Madol area. After the sinking of Lemuria, understand that what I'm speaking about is not in chronological order, and I apologize. Let me put this straight. Lemuria sank about 16,000 years ago. Atlantis sank 11,564 years, I believe it was, before the crucifixion. And that was roughly 2,000 ago. So that's when Atlantis sank. And when Lemuria sank, it was due to an earth tilt. And the earth tilt was brought about by underground explosions, which leads us to why India, and I'll get there in just a moment. So, first of all, when the mountains arose, that was before Lemuria sank. I just equated them, it was long before Lemuria sank. I just equated them as the numbers of life lost. Lemuria was the biggest loss of life, and then long before that, when the mountains arose in the north of India, it was, and then later on, the sinking of Atlantis was a massive, massive loss of life. The Kailash, they came to the first time. Then they came back, and that was, as we've said, over 300 million years ago. Then they came back a second time. It looks to me something like 44 million years ago. But this time they came, and man had descended into savagery. They had to yet again completely redo the DNA. The 4 cycles of man depicted by 4 animals. Within each of those cycles there are, shall we say, 6 little cycles. And the 6 little cycles is sort of a repetition. Let's equate it to a fish swimming around a fishbowl. He will go 6 times around the fishbowl, and then one big cycle is completed. So that is why there are these 4 animals. Now let's look at what's in the middle. The middle is the 5th cycle of man, with the original ones walking amongst them, oftentimes in forgetfulness. The significance of the change in the DNA of humanity is at an atomic structure level, and this is what the August webinar will have. That will explain why the 5th turns everything everybody believed upside down. It's like an upside down bell. Everything anybody believed, it has been turned on its ear, and we are in the process of that. This is the 5th time. And again, that is the middle of that area with the 4 animals. It's also a prophecy. I can feel that there are things I am not seeing, and that this is a very partial answer, because I'm not sure what questions to ask. But why India? Why did the original ones choose India? Well, there are 2 things that I can see, but they feel partially accurate. The first one is that the reason that Lemuria sank was that there are non-organic, whatever this may mean, natural gas tubes that circumvent the globe. They go around the planet. I have for some years been saying that Lemuria sank. It had 7 land masses, 7 sort of little subcontinents, and it sank gradually, allowing some of its population to migrate into the Americas, particularly South America, because those ignited. If there's a blockage in the gas, it will either cause an earthquake or it will cause a volcanic eruption. India, from its central bulk part of its landmass down to the south, have hardly any of these. They don't have the tubes right underneath the land that is likely at some point to explode, earthquakes, tidal waves, etc. They just don't have that. In addition to that, the land is very magnetic and less electrical. It's high in magnetics. Lands like that tend to not attract natural cataclysms. They don't, cataclysms that happen are electrical. The original ones used to create of themselves grounding rods for the electricity to pass through them to prevent cataclysms from happening. India was a good land to put your bet on that nothing too bad is going to happen to it, but that does not seem to me to be the primary reason. There time tunnel was created, and they made that time tunnel, the original ones, to come out at the Kailash area. I don't see that that was ever closed, because I know that Isis was aware of the time tunnel, but that it wasn't closed at her time, which is much, much, much later than the original ones in the area. And by the way, she is the one that lake, she dedicated it to women, and sacred sexuality, and everything was part of what she did there. The women's bathing lake, that was her construct. Now you're asking me the question of how does the Kailash monument connect to the Buddhist in Java, and also the ancient Javanese spiritualism, how does it relate to Egypt? And this is one of those where I flounder, because how many of the hundreds of ways does one actually look at? Let's just look at two obvious ones that jump up. The fact is that the Nagas missionaries, and as I've said, that came, if you add up the time Atlantis sank and you add on 3,000 years, you're looking back at about 15,000 years. They started going all over the world at that time because prophets could see that Lemuria was going to sink. And it was the hub of spiritualism and culture and so on, and they wanted to preserve this, because it sank between 15 and 14,000 years ago. So at 15,000 years ago, these missionaries were already in India. And how did they get there? Well, they got there from Ethiopia to Egypt. From Egypt, they went through Asia. And they also went into India from Lemuria, but also down to the top through Asia. They went to China, and they went from China into the area north of India and then into India, but also by the ocean. That is one of the connections of that whole area of, religion similarities, is they were all taught by the Nagas or the Nagas. So that's one way. Later, when Isis ruled India, land of gemstones given to her by her grandfather, and when she decided it was a very good idea to make herself a goddess to be worshipped, this was her family. The family dispute went like this. Thoth was at the hub of it, always was. Major mischief maker, dark shadow being, black magician, etc. It was with him that she was always bumping heads with, in competition with. She detested his arrogance. Also, Thoth was able to travel interplanetarily. Isis really did not, but she did travel a lot around the world. They had craft that could do it far more easily than our current ones. Thoth's older brother, he was the son of Enki. His oldest brother was known as Ra in Egypt, or in the Anunnaki tongue as Marduk. Thoth built up Egypt as his pride and joy. He had a device called Ytolan, Ytolan, that could raise cities easily, hence the massive monuments and stuff. This was a dispute, because when grandfather came to visit the earth, Anu, remember, Anu meaning come from heaven, came to visit the earth, Marduk aired his grievances, that he had been left out of dividing the earth amongst this ruling family. So they said, well, that's true. And Enki tried to pacify. His favorite was always Thoth, tried to pacify him by giving him the undeveloped lands of Atlantis, taking away what was his in Egypt and giving it to his oldest brother, Marduk. Isis was often in Egypt for family things, also in the area known as Akkad and Sumeria, where her father had his palaces, Enlil. And he was senior to Enki, who had Thoth and Ra and so on. Also Osiris was the youngest. So she was often there. She competed with it. At one point, when Thoth locked up Osiris in the Great Pyramid, she was furious because Osiris was her love. And Isis actually attacked. She attacked and blew the nose right off the Sphinx. That's why that's broken like that. There was a massive inter-family war going on there. By the time the Nagas restored the Kailash building, there were just pieces sticking out of the ground. But they knew it as a holy site of the creators. So they built a temple there. You're asking me what that site would have looked like? Because now this would be the second construction, if we don't count the self-renewing building that went on with the original ones. And this was done by the Nagas. How did it look like? Other than that, it had the Kaldi, for the word Chaldean comes from that, the walls around it. What they did there was to teach. And whatever they put up was to teach. It was made, to facilitate learning. It used specific angles in its building and so on according to sacred geometry. But it wasn't ornamental. It was a place of learning. So if you're seeing carving on the wall that gives, cosmological principles, that came from them and eventually was translated into other languages, perhaps recarved, but they're the originators from that. The Nakal were on that site at that time, but as we've said, Isis was given by her grandfather, India, 43,000 years before. It was known as the land of gemstones. Egypt at that time was known as Kem, Khem. She proclaimed herself a goddess 17,500 years ago. But the temple to herself that she created there are two mistakes in that paragraph that you wrote there. One is mine and one is yours, I believe. The god Quetzalcoatl was not Enki. It was Enki's son Thoth. Thoth loved the idea of being worshipped and all the rest of it. Plus he needed the gold for his black magic. His presence in Mesoamerica as Quetzalcoatl, it's Thoth, not Enki. As for the temple creation by Ishana, we put that at 17,500 years ago. But that is not entirely an accurate date because we have got the Nagas coming in 3,000 years before the sinking of Atlantis, which would make it roundabout a little over 15,000 years ago. And they are the ones that built there at that time. She built a temple to herself and started this goddess worship. And incidentally, the Nakal from Lemuria, the emphasis was on the feminine deity. As for the original ones, They were so far above making statues of and things that are sentimentally attached to the mother goddess, because they were in contact with the mother goddess. At a spiritual level, it was not pagan, like the statues of the female deities and things. That's not their style at all. It is an inner worship. The temple creation by Ishana had to have been later. And I will just take a moment and see if I can see the date. It was before the sinking of Atlantis, but it looks to me more like it was around 13,400 or 13,500 years ago that she actually put a temple up there. Inanna or Isis or Ishana, her goal was to impress. It was opulence, extravagance, it was her nature. And you're asking me, who was she? Literally, she was the shadow of the mother. The shadow that the Holy Mother, cast during times when the planet was asleep. And that's not very helpful, but no, she definitely wasn't a goddess or a Holy Mother. She was, if you want to say that, a shadow goddess. But, she made herself a goddess, but did not create the temple till either after the Nagas left or she chased them away. I'm not sure which one. Why? Shiva, the dancing Shiva, is on the rooftop where the four beasts and four concentric circles are. And by the way, 144 petals. There were 144 original ones that were responsible for the DNA development of man. They kept coming back. Shiva represents the electrical, the catastrophe that caused the 4 cycles of man, which is above it, is electrical. Catastrophes that have happened on Earth have been electrical in nature. So it can well be called the one that destroys the old to bring in the new. By the way, the 144 original ones, the 144 petals, during the 4 cycles of man, while there was development made on the DNA of man, the height of their development at the end of the 4th stage, we've now entered the 5th, so some different things are happening, but at the end of the 4th stage, at the height of their development, humanity would have 144 strands of DNA, 2 visible to the eye, the other not visible to the human eye, because man was created to be an interdimensional being. Those are expressions of the other groups of DNA strands that are not visible to the eye that sees only the physical. The tunnel that you're asking me, is this some sort of device? I believe that's what you were referring to. But what that tunnel was known as by the Nagas, and many of their features Isis kept, because people were familiar with this was a holy place. She kept it and then just made it more ornate and in honor of herself. That tunnel was known as the tunnel of imploding external consciousness to go into inner consciousness. Let's put it a different way. It's the tunnel between outer and inner space. Visually, it looks like it becomes smaller and smaller as you stand there and look at the portals going smaller and smaller. It means a withdrawal from the outside to enter into the inside, the inner space. The sounds that you folks are sometimes hearing in this area of people being tortured. Yes, we did have brutal iron fist that Ishana used against princelings that would try and defy her, because there were constant uprisings and she quelled them with great ferocity. But I believe what it is you are hearing is that it seems to me, I have really visceral response to the images that come up, but the Nagas were bigots. They were fanatical, that their cosmology was the way for humanity back up out of a fall of consciousness, and they would die to protect it. They had multiple records at the monument. So when this was their temple, they had many records there. ISIS came in and pillaged their temple, and they had ferreted it away up north, and she wanted the information and she tortured them. She wanted the information why. There were some obsessions with Ishana, and she was not a holy figure. Neither was Thoth, neither was any of them. They were very selfish, very self-centered, power mongers. She was also politically always aligning herself, that hence her very strong friendship with the giants from the inner earth. There's a tunnel under the Great Pyramid that also goes through the crust into the civilizations in the inner earth. The earth is hollow. So let's take a look at, what did she want from these poor monks, these Nagual monks? Her obsession was eternal youth. Her obsession was immortality. But her obsession was to become truly divine. This was the place where the creators were honored and so on. Well, that is what she aspired to. She wanted to be one of the ancient holy ones on earth. So she wanted their information. They knew she would destroy it and not pass it on to man, and they were traveling at night. There were tunnels underneath that they used to get these things away from her reach. They would sometimes go to areas where these records had been kept. Like, if you look at the Pacific Ocean, at the top there are I believe it's the Aleutian Islands that go between the Russia and Alaska. The Aleutian Islands, well, when you follow it all the way to the west, to the land that is there, which I believe is Russia, but if you follow it there, they had a temple there. When the earth tilted, this is one of the big catastrophes. The waters washed north up the Pacific, and they washed south down the Atlantic. In the case of the Atlantic, it brought a lot of debris with it. But it washed completely over their temple. They dug through 40 feet of mud to restore and get their records out. That's how important they were. They were willing to be tortured and died rather than give up the location where they hid all their records, because this was clearly a very main repository from whence they carried tablets to different places. So there was torturing of the monks as it changed hands from them to Ishana. Now, as for the lotus images, see, her northern temple, where she went, and it was dependent on monsoon rains when she was there and when she wasn't, and also when it was too hot at her southern one, it was surrounded by beautiful lakes, constructed lakes, with thousands of lotus flowers. She would bathe in the waters, in the lotus flowers, and this became like a symbol for her. Later, other names of female deities were used and so on, but she is the one where the lotus flower became the holy flower, because after all, there's a goddess bathing in it. The only time travelers that I see coming through that temple were the original ones, and it appears to me that I am mistaken when I say she was able to travel through time. Why it's confusing to me is several things. Okay, firstly, there are space tunnels from Egypt to Ireland and from Egypt to the mid-North Americas. It looks like Missouri or something. Possibly Missouri. There are traveling tunnels from Egypt to there and from Egypt to Ireland. She was able to use tunnels like that. And there aren't any that I see in India. But she would go from Egypt to explore another place, like Ireland. So, she was moving around in space. But there's something here about her search for immortality. There was a way that Thoth had found to keep beings in a state of perpetual rejuvenation that would last about 10,000 years, and then they'd have to go in again for something like 10 years, and then they'd come out for another 10,000 years. He did not give access to that to Isis. What it was is also the power of Itolan. The power of Itolan was so recreating ability, had such recreating abilities that if you lay under it in stasis for a certain number of years, it renewed all the cells in the body. So there were methods to stay alive for a longer time without traveling through time tunnels. It does not look like they had any. Or they had it, but they didn't know how to use it. Because if I look today, that time tunnel is still open, yet no one knows how to use it. What I've seen of Isis is that there were three, the Toblerone candy bar, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it's a triangular tube of chocolate. Well, if you take 3 tubes like that, triangular long piece of crystal, you lie flat on one, and you have another flat surface at a 45-degree angle to the left and to the right, so that you're really in kind of a triangle between these 3 triangles of crystal, as long and a little longer than your body. Isis was about 7 feet tall, maybe little under that. So she would lie there in stasis, and then she would awaken again new. So this is her way to be moving through time, but not through time tunnels. I cannot see that actually happening. The tubes that were given to her by her uncle, Enki, were tubes that were used in genetic manipulation of humanity to produce a stronger working class, to produce more intelligence, and so on. They served the Anunnaki. Well, the genetic facility was where today Saudi Arabia was, except it wasn't all desert. It was green. But Saudi Arabia, and it was under the master geneticist Ninhursag. But Enki's wife was also very much involved with genetic development, and she was in South Africa. There was a facility there. Stranger, it's very similar to, the sort of within 1,000 miles, I guess, of of where the original ones also had a facility to develop the genetics of man. Again, for some reason, it's not worth searching for, there was also a facility there. Enki was a geneticist as well. He was very interested in creating a strong human race. The Olmeca were a giant race of Africans. The Olmeca did atrocities when they went into South America, and they're depicted with negroid features. This is one of the results of the genetic experiments that was done in southern Africa. And there was a land mass there, a little sort of smallish Australia. I think it was called Gondalawara land, and that is where they lived, the Olmeca. They definitely did work with genetics, and there were tubes given to Inanna, but it does not look to me like she ever really developed that at all in India. It was given to her. If she had, there would have been not a reality of such poverty and hardship. There would have been more flourishing amongst the population. But she was more interested in politics, self-aggrandizement, and keeping control of her population. She was far more interested in that than actually developing them. But we spoke previously about the tubes that I saw. Well, in some of the boxes, arcs, whatever they are, those were tubes not of the original ones. They were tubes given for the genetic development of life in India to Isis by her uncle Enki, and she did not develop that fully. The British didn't take anything from the Kailash because there was nothing to take. What they were looking for is the source of life. Through the ages, the fact that on Earth there is a source of life has been the object of star races, many different populations looking for it. Hitler and his soldiers looked for it in the South Pole. Star races have been digging, drilling, doing all sorts of things in the South Pole for decades, trying to find the source of life. The British were told, I don't know if it's from tablets, from wall secrets, from priests, that Kailash was the origin of life. It had the source of life, the secret to it. They couldn't understand where or how, but it did. They were looking for the source of life. Hitler, same thing. Hitler at one point went to the headwaters of, not him himself, but his expeditions, the headwaters of the Amazon. But there's a tunnel there that goes to the inner earth. But he was looking for the source of life. And just like Inanna, Hitler gathered, he kept his in the Vatican, in the very bottom story that he was a tenant of the Vatican. He took magical objects from all over the world, all the countries that he conquered. They looked for arcana, for the mystical, gathered and put in the bottom of the Vatican. There was a tunnel that came from San Remo all the way down Italy, underground, into the Vatican that Hitler's soldiers used. So that is what the British were looking for. Is there any access to underground chambers? It looks to me like they're partially, if not impossibly so, collapsed. So how dangerous are the loose rocks on the monument? I do not see anything happening there that's problematic other than if there is an earthquake. And I don't see that in the near future either. In closing, I want us to consider the hold that the past has had on us. We have tried to deny it. It has refused to go away. We tried to suppress it, but it has come knocking on our door time and time again. Look at me. We have tried to replace it with the moment, with happy memories. But that became the past, the very next moment. How then do we deal with these stories of the past? Exactly like that. When I watch a video with one of my family members as something they choose to spend time with, then when I'm done, I ask, what did this show me about myself as life? The entertainment that I have is not a waste of time. Toltec Naguals are taught to live frugally, and this is a term that is often misunderstood. Does it mean not to live abundantly? No, not at all. It means not to waste energy, effort, time. No movie I watch with my daughter, for instance, is a waste of time, because I know that this movie has been in front of me so that I can learn about something about myself, about life, or that I can simply be reawakened to the adventure of life. Beloved ones, we do not like looking back at the drama and the tragedies. We want it to go away. But nothing is ever present in our experience that doesn't serve a purpose. If people come and flock to see the same dramatic movies, people dying and people saving and people heroic over and over, but will refuse to look at the drama that took place in a specific event of their own life, they are living in denial that their life has been no more than a movie. It is there and then it is not. You can look at it again, replay the movie without emotion. There was a t-shirt that we printed years ago, and I didn't know what the words were that I was given to put on that t-shirt. To unravel space without emotion. The space that this is referring to are the cosmos constructions, the stages of growth, the stages of evolution we have designed for ourselves. They make spaces and they make matrices. So we are never really free in these self-made prisons. Well, without emotion, look at scenes in your life. They will present themselves to you. The stage that you are all in is going to flush up old memories, and you would think suddenly, why did I think of that? Observe the drama, but observe it as though it is someone else. You are the observer, you are the audience. Yes, you are also the actor. But this is an unreal stage play, an unreal film. See the adventure of it, then learn its lessons. And without emotion, you are participating as an audience in this event. In doing so, you diffuse, its shame, its guilt, its pain, its anger, its fear. You diffuse it. By looking at the Titanic movie and seeing it as a great adventure to be watched because it inspires with heroism, and it has villains and it has heroes. Your life is like that. Although you may shed a tear or two at the end of Titanic, that is fine. But no, this is a movie. These are actors. This is a movie. You were the actor. Look at it in the scope of an eternal adventure. To the infinite the glory forever and ever. May we release the tension we feel by opposing the past, the present, what we think is going to be the future. We strengthen what we oppose. Let us instead become fluid dreamers of the dream. Let us find daily the things that bring us rapture, ecstasy, and joy. Little things. In the face of a single petal of a rose, do we find eternity? Beloved ones, may we jointly commit and ask for infinite assistance to release our resistance to the past, to view it as a learning opportunity that is entertaining as an adventure. We ask that we be assisted by the infinite, and that any needed angelic beings that can assist with eliminating these emotions that tie us to the adventure as though it is real. Amen.